My dad and I are sitting, talking. He's laying in his hospital bed. I'm sitting next to him. We're talking, and all of a sudden my dad stops talking, and I turn and I look, and my mom is standing in the doorway. And she was downtown. She had an appointment. She came. She asked my dad how he was doing, how he was feeling. She asked me how I was doing. Is there anything I can do? No, we're okay. All right. And she went. And when my dad was discharged from the hospital, and we figured out, so he had an ulcer, which was one of the reasons they thought he had stomach cancer, thank God. It was an ulcer. They put him on his medication, things like that. They had to change his diet. And every Sunday, my mom would cook for my dad and send food with my brother to my father. There is no woman that I know who separated from a spouse and had, a relationship like my parents had, which was virtually non-existent other than my brother and I being kind of their kids and in the middle, who would sit and intentionally prepare meals that he enjoys.
Yes.
That are within the restrictions that he needs to heal. And she did that until the day he was admitted into the hospital and didn't come home.
Before you left Iran, which city was it, by the way?
I was born in Tehran.
In Tehran, right?
And
so it's the capital.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was born in Tehran, and then towards the end of it, I think we spent a lot of time north where my mom's family was while my dad was trying to figure out how to get us out. I think.
What's north? What's considered
north?
Like a city?
So my mom is from a very small town called Babol.
Okay.
I don't know how far north. It's not quite up into the Russian border, but it's not that far either. I think it's an equal distance from the capital to, it'll take you just as long to get into Russia as it would to get into into Tehran. So
it's a big country.
It's a very large country apparently. And my dad is from all the way south, right on the Gulf.
Do you notice that with some of these countries that are out there, I hear people going, even in places like, say, Italy, they go, I'm from the north. Another one will say, no, I'm from the south.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm like, it's the same country.
Yep.
Inside the same country.
Yep.
And not just Italy, so many countries are like this.
We do it here with PEI.
You do? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
East Coast, West Coast.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Right?
Southerner.
We're same country.
Yeah.
And we say, but we're from here.
Because it's very different.
They're from
differentiation.
there. So right inside a country, does that happen over there too?
All the time.
Like, I'm from Shiraz.
Yes. Oh, Shawnees.
Oh, these Tehran people. Oh. I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So I'm like the worst person to ask, but basically Tehranese are very, and I'll use my own cousins as an example. So
here we go.
My mom's family is very affluent, right? And they come from a smaller town, and my mom has two brothers. My youngest uncle married a woman from their same city. They moved to Tehran. Their kids were born there and whatever. And my youngest cousin married a gentleman who is, also from a small town. And her sister was all against that. Because how could you marry some villager? And you're kind of looking at this
so
going...
then there's class systems.
Yeah.
Not just location.
But technically we're all villagers. What do you mean? And it's very much so. There's a mentality where when you're from Tehran, you're from the big city. It's like a Torontonian, right? Canadians will look at Torontonians in a very specific kind of a way, right? They kind of look at us as a little bit, more, stuck up, a little bit more snotty. I don't know how you want to put it. I had a professor at university who was like, Torontonians are the most ignorant Canadians you'll ever meet. They don't know anything north of highway. And whatever highway he said, I had no idea where it was. But in that moment, I was like, oh, how rude. How can you say that? And
this was a Canadian.
Yeah, this is a professor.
I get accused of that when I go
okay.
home.
Here.
Oh.
Telling us.
This was happening in downtown Toronto.
Saying that Torontonians
That's an
are
interesting
the most
detail.
ignorant Canadians you'll ever find. They don't know anything outside of their bubble. And it's a very similar viewpoint. And I don't know if it's just culturally, it is what it is, right? So they have a slightly different accent. They speak faster. And to be able to live in Tehran is very difficult, right? It's very expensive. So there's different viewpoints from people who come from different places. And, you want to be a Tehrani because that means
so you're from the city.
I am from the city. I was born in the city, but at the end of the day, I was gone by the time I was 3.
Right.
So Iranians here specifically don't really view me as one of them, right? Because I didn't grow up there. I don't have their experiences. I don't have their accent. I don't have...
You speak Farsi? You understand Farsi?
I understand Farsi to an extent. My parents only spoke with us Farsi at home because obviously we'll get English outside of the house. But at the end of the day, like, my daughter has lots of Iranian friends at school. So the mom, sometimes I have to call my mom and be like, so this mom said this. What does that mean? Because I have no idea. She's like, it means this. What did you do? I said, I smiled and I nodded.
If I were to ask your daughter, right?
Yep.
When you meet somebody who in Toronto is from Iran, do you ask them which city they're from? Right? They don't, do they?
Some do.
Do they?
Yeah, some do.
But the kids, your kids and their kids are born here.
They're born here.
So they go, where are you from? Iran. And then they carry on? Or do they go,
No.
wait, what part of Iran are you from?
No, absolutely not.
Right.
It's just
Absolutely not.
Isn't that just like the next generations are like, yeah, we're from Iran. Okay, let's move on.
Yeah. So many of them are mixed, right? My husband's Egyptian. Many of her friends, mom is from Canada or mom is from Italy and whatever. And dad is the one who's Iranian or vice versa. Very few of her Iranian friends are full Iranian.
Yeah. Like even when we lived in the States, for example, we lived in a place outside Orlando. But if you were to talk to somebody who was from not locally and they said, hey, where are you staying? We're like, yeah, we're in Orlando. But it was actually not Orlando, the city. It's just outside Orlando because nobody lives in Orlando. Like some people live in Orlando, but who stays in Orlando? So I find that the further out you go, like the less relevant where you're from starts actually mattering. Like, okay, like I always say, like if I was to meet somebody from Mars, would I tell them Toronto? Would I tell them Canada? Or would I just say Earth? Right? And then a person from Iran and a person from Canada meet a person from Mars and they go, yeah, we're both from Earth. Okay. Yeah, you look the same to me, like the Martian would say.
Yeah.
Right? And then off you go. Yeah. But when the closer we get, we're like, okay, you're from here and I'm from there. And then the closer even we get, we're like, oh, you're from the city and I'm from the village, and then there are these kind of like differences.
Yep.
Do you think?
Very much so. I noticed it in Ottawa. So when I got married, I moved to Ottawa.
Right.
And people would ask me where you're from. Like, where are you from? Where do you come from? Toronto. And Toronto.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Like, what do you mean? Oh, okay. And I remember shopping for winter clothing. My first winter in Ottawa, I thought I was going to die. It's so cold.
It's a different cold. Yeah.
It's humid cold. So like, it's just, it's very different. So what I would wear here in, the middle of February, October, didn't work. And they would say to me, oh, honey.
Yeah.
Oh, honey. Here we dress for warmth, not for style.
Yes.
Like, oh, okay. But then you would talk to other people and it's like, oh, so where are you from? Toronto. What part? And it would be like Hamilton. And I'm thinking, that's not Toronto. Like, not even close to Toronto. But I had that mentality. I had the mentality of like, I had somebody tell me they were from Toronto and they ended up being from like, I want to say Brampton.
Yeah.
And in my head, I was like, that is not so not Toronto.
Right.
But really, is it not like?
But the further away you go, the less it matters.
It's just the most simplistic thing for people that might not be aware of the suburbs of Toronto.
100%.
Yeah.
And they do that in the Ottawa Valley. Like, where are you from? Ottawa. Oh, what part? Here. And I'm like, oh, wait, what? That's not Ottawa. Renfrew's not Ottawa. Oh, you're familiar with the area. Yeah.
Why do you think that happens?
I think part of it is because they're so used to being looked at as if, like, what speckle of dust is this? Like, where do you come from? Especially when you're talking to somebody, or at least I think, when you're talking to somebody who you view as coming from somewhere slightly more civilized, let's say.
You think so? That has something to do with it?
I think so, because in Ottawa, they're very, I don't know how to explain it. When I moved to Ottawa, it was the first time I experienced racism. I'd lived in Toronto my entire life. Well, minus the first 3 years. And the first time I experienced racism was at the age of 25 when I'd moved to Ottawa. And it wasn't even geared towards me.
What's the difference, you think, between that kind of racism and someone going, you're from Tehran, you're from Shiraz? Isn't it the same kind of, is it the root, the same ism?
Probably.
Do you think so?
Probably. It's not racism more so as it is, I think like that is more of cultural
hierarchy, perceived
hierarchy. Like we're all...
What's racism?
We're all the same kind of... Oh, okay. So an example of racism. So first time I'd ever experienced something like this, I had a woman come into... So at the time when I'd moved, I was...
in Ottawa now.
In Ottawa. So I used to manage fitness clubs. Yeah. So I used to manage fitness clubs. And I had a woman who'd come in and she was complaining to me. She's a French-Canadian lady. And she's complaining to me that she had to go to Ministry of Transportation to renew her driver's license, and she had to wait behind these brown people. And how dare I, as a Canadian, have to wait behind brown people? And I'm looking at her going, oh, okay, what is happening?
Yeah.
And I remember saying to her, I said, Monique, like, you see the color of my skin, right? Like, you can't say these kinds of things, number one. And you can't say it to people like me. Like, you could be talking about my family. Oh, no, you're not one of them.
Oh, yeah.
I just kind of looked at her. I said, oh. She goes, you don't have an accent. You're not here to take my job. And I thought, wow.
Well, it's a real feeling
heard
on the other
of
side.
something like that.
Yeah.
And I've never experienced what it would be like to live in Iran and have somebody be like, ooh, you're from, Abadan, which is where my dad is from. Or, oh, you're from, Shamal. I've never had that experience, so I don't know what they do to one another there.
But, it's interesting. You said earlier when we were talking that you had left Iran for a reason. What was that reason?
They were going to execute my dad.
Okay, so
basically,
that's a feeling that might be even worse than look, I don't want to stand behind you in line, right?
Yeah.
And that was being done by people who you might feel were like similar to you in some ways. They're Iranians. You're Iranian. But when you came here, you've got somebody saying this about not wanting to stand behind in line behind somebody with, a certain color of skin.
Yeah.
What felt worse? Like first instinct, what's worse?
That woman talking about the color of my skin.
Someone wants to kill your dad, though.
So for me, I was so little.
That was her. That wasn't her.
Right? I was so little. And my parents are such incredibly special humans. You would never know growing up that there was something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You would never know. So when my dad was sick, so my dad passed away in 2019, and when he knew he was dying long before he told any of us. So he started opening up a lot and telling us a lot of stories and things like that. And he would tell me stories where my mom and I and him would be out in the streets of Tehran shopping, and the guard would be out. And my dad would have to flee and seek cover, right? And as a child, I never experienced moments where I felt like we were in danger or anything. My parents were very good at making sure that I was happy and that things were good. And even growing up, in the areas that we grew up in, until you saw people, we saw a lot of different things. But until you saw it, I didn't think we were anywhere that was unusual. We had a great childhood. We had so much fun. But yeah, every so often you'd go to a birthday party and there were a couple of people sitting in the hallways with needles in their arms.
So when you came to Canada, where did your family move to?
Scarborough. Yeah.
Was that what you're describing?
Yeah,
You
that's
were living
what-
here.
Yeah, that was here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you were 3 when you moved.
Yep.
And that's when you start becoming more aware of what's going on around you, as you said. So you have never ever felt any sense of insecurity or danger where you were born, even though it was Tehran, even though it was a city, because your parents just kind of created that environment.
My parents created an environment where I can say I've never felt unsafe. I knew, certain things, maybe even more so here, because again, back home, a lot of it was if there were issues, clearly my mom and I, or I would be with family and my parents would kind of sort themselves out. They would never have me in that kind of a situation. And we were fortunate. My mom had friends who had to go through the mountains on the backs of donkeys. We got to get on an airplane.
Right.
Right? We got to get on a plane and we got to go.
And people disappear.
Oh yeah.
They don't show up again.
They just...
When we were growing up, it was in another country in the Middle East as well, and we were told right then. So I was about 7 when I left. Yeah. So by that time, you're spending some time a bit more out there. You're not always under the guardianship or supervision of your parents. And we were told, listen, this isn't a way to behave, and this is not a way to behave. And if you do get seen this way, so and so disappeared. We'd be told a story. We were old enough to talk and start understanding. And you probably heard about those kind of things. Once you hit that age that you were capable of even understanding, because they would want you to know. Right.
To an extent, my parents never wanted us to my parents never wanted us to know what exactly had been experienced back home to the full extent.
And I guess they didn't really have to, because we were from it so early. It'd be different if you were in it. You'd have to have some level of awareness to be able to navigate that 100%. Structure. But it doesn't serve that purpose when that environment isn't here
Yeah.
with you.
100%.
Yeah.
So when you first moved here and you're this kid, do you remember anything when you were 3, or was it your first?
It's actually really funny.
Yeah.
My dad asked me, he goes, what's like the first, like what's the thing that you remember, like the earliest thing
Aside
that you
from
remember?
the cold,
Yeah. Which I didn't mind.
right?
Because like,
No, it's
yay, go.
Snow angels.
Exactly.
Right, that's what we did.
But one of the first memories that I was able to recall, I told my dad, I said, I said, I don't know if I'm making this up or not, but I remember you and me and mom were walking down a hallway and we passed a hair salon that had the entire ceiling caved in and this and that. And we were sitting here, mom and I were sitting, and I went on a carousel and you went up somewhere else and you met with a man. And my dad's all the color from his face drained. And he was like, how do you remember this? And it was in Portugal when we were trying to immigrate. And it was somebody who was helping us, you know, get from Portugal to Austria so we could come to Canada. He's like, how do you remember this? I'm like, oh, I do.
Yeah.
But I do remember certain things. Like I do remember, but all good things, you know what I mean? I remember coming and certain things, like I remember my teachers from kindergarten. I remember my daycare teachers. And I remember, you know, basic things that are, you know, normal in my world. Like, you know, there were a lot of... We had a guy they called Harvey the cockroach that lived in our building. And it was because they tried to like kill him, I don't know how many times, and he wouldn't die. They stabbed
tried to
him.
kill
Like we were not in a very good part of town, you know.
Right.
The person had problems with addiction, and I'm sure that there were people he didn't pay. I don't know, right? You're a kid. All you knew is that Harvey the cockroach was like in the hospital. Now he's back.
Not all parts of it have to make
Actually,
sense.
yeah, we had,
Yeah, okay. Harvey the cockroach.
And it was just one of those, and it was like,
was a
okay,
community
whatever,
member.
no big deal. But like, maybe I was 9, and I remember a woman, I woke up in the middle of the night because there was a woman running down the street underneath my bedroom window. And I mean, underneath my bedroom window, I was on the 10th floor, and you could hear her shrieking for help. Help, help, my husband's been stabbed.
Right.
Shrieking, this woman. And I don't know if they helped her, they didn't help her. But from that point, I remember my dad used to go to work at like 5:30 in the morning, and I would get up every morning. I would hear him, and I would watch him because his car was parked on the street underneath my window, and I would watch him get in his car
to make sure.
just to make sure he was okay. So things like this, I'm sure, were not normal. You think about it now, and they're like, yeah, not normal. But
Was there a point when you moved that you first started realizing, okay, like I'm not, this is not where I was born. This is not the first place I, you know, like there are different people here than what I'm used to seeing or anything like that.
so I don't remember. So I don't even remember.
Farsi at home,
Yeah.
and you go outside, you speak English.
I remember
So at
meeting
one
the
point in time,
first
like you speak
person
English
who
for the first time, right? Like
So I didn't even know that.
Right.
My dad told me in 2016, he clarified for me that English is not your first language. And I thought, huh?
Okay.
What do you mean? Because I can't even imagine a time where I didn't speak English. He's like, we came to this country and we threw you into kindergarten. You didn't speak a word of English.
Right.
And I thought, oh. He's like, you don't remember this?
Right.
No.
Okay.
He goes, we feel so much guilt. I'm like, really? I don't remember never speaking English. I don't ever remember not being able to like
Communicate with
other people. But in kindergarten, I met my best friend, and she's also Iranian. So it was like a big deal that we met somebody from the same country.
Did she speak Farsi as well?
Not much. At all.
Okay.
And when you met you wouldn't remember. Do you remember? Like, did you meet because you were like, did you?
No, I was in the
friends 'cause
sandbox.
you're
It's
both
actually really funny because she told the story at my wedding, and I was in the sandbox, and I was alone, and I was talking about snakes in the sandbox, and you've got to get up, and she thought I was totally nuts. But she was like my best friend. She's very tall. She's 6'2", gorgeous, built like a model. But she was always tall, right? So kids weren't very nice to her.
Yeah.
Right? Kids picked on her, and you know, I guess kids weren't too nice to me either. Obviously, if I'm playing in the sandbox by myself, who knows? But I guess I was just one of those people that was like, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go do my own thing, and we just kind of clicked. And it was like, oh, what's your name? And oh, what's my name? And oh, where are you from? And oh, I'm from here. And oh, we're the same. And that was it.
Ah, okay.
It was it. That was where we were and who we are. And I remember I defended that. Like anybody who would be cruel to her, I would just like, and it worked. And, you know, high school, I remember we moved, and her and I were walking down like to get to the bus stop from my mom's apartment. And some guy was like, oh my God, you guys are still friends. Turned around, we're like, what? It turned out to be a boy from daycare. And he's like, nobody forgets the two of you. Oh, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And they ended up in high school together. It was so funny. And he told me, he's like, you threatened to beat me up with a tennis racket once because I asked her if she played basketball.
So do you feel like, okay, so you grew up in, what part of town?
Cedar Bay.
So Cedar Bay. So when you're in Cedar Bay, do you feel that there's a certain way you got to operate when you're in Cedar Bay?
I know now. I didn't know then. No, but you're very aware of your surroundings.
Okay.
So when you grow up in an area where there's a lot of unpredictability, right? So there are people who, generally don't make the best choices in life. And because of that, there are certain things that could suddenly break out in the middle of an afternoon, right? Like you never know. There could be a situation where maybe you have somebody who is on drugs and maybe not in their right mind. And you have to be aware of those surroundings. You have to be aware of, is there a situation where somebody is looking like maybe they're not in the best state of mind? So let's walk on the other side of the street. Or is there...
But where did you learn that?
I don't know. It's just a natural
situational
thing.
Awareness, I think.
You know what I mean? You just... Honestly, and don't get me wrong, like obviously when we were little, we would play outside or we would go swing, and the older, like the boys who were in the gangs or whatever else, when you're little, they take care of you. It's actually very interesting. They very much take care of
it's very family oriented.
So they will if you're going to go and do something, they'd be like, whoa, like, no, do you not see what's happening over there? Come back.
So you learned it
kind of indirectly being told, like, do you see what's happening there? Do you see what's happening here? Like, keep your eyes open. And it just becomes a way of you operate very aware because you just want to make sure that if there's a situation, where your exits.
Well, what I'm trying to understand, and I'm wondering if you see this as well, is this something that you understood, or was it something that was given to you through a lens? So, like somebody in that group of your friends were like, hey, what's happening there, be careful. And you yourself might have been like, what's happening? But it's a lens. That person across the road there, see, who looks like that, who walks like that, who sounds like that, be careful of that.
Yeah.
It's a lens.
Yeah.
That's what I'm just trying to understand, because it happens everywhere. And even in Cedar Bay, right, there are, like you said, you're with people who are looking out for you.
Yeah.
So the starting point is, we care for you. You're part of us. You see, like the commonality, like with we're from Tehran, they're from Shiraz. We're this group. We're Torontonians. You're from Ottawa. Are you seeing like what I'm saying?
Yes, a little bit, and not
lenses.
so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like you're not a part of their group, right? So it was never. Oh no, nothing like that.
By them.
You're not. So they're not there to supervise you,
Right.
But so the best way to put it is like, let's say this is where the swimming pool is, right? And we're swinging the pool and we get out and we go out behind the fence. Now we're running around in the field, and they would sit, right? And they would be in like where the lifeguards' house is, and they would do whatever it is that they're not supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. But if they noticed that the kids are like running a little too close to the street, they'd call us back. If they noticed that there was something going on, maybe there was a fight about to break out or something, they would call us back and they would just kind of be like, come here, stay here. Over there, do you see what's going on? You don't want to be there right now. It wasn't so much that, this is our family and here we are and we're all going to take care of you and we're going to sit here and we're going to show you all of these things.
Sure.
But when you hear enough of it, you become aware, and they would tell you, you've got to look, you've got to see what's happening, you've got to see what's going on. And then, like I would have friends whose older siblings would end up in the gangs.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They get that's the hook, right?
Yeah.
That's the hook for the ones that are vulnerable. Yeah. Is that macro level of like supervision, and then the ones that might not have the connection or someone at home, whatever it be, a parent or extended family, whatever the connection is to keep them grounded, then they're the ones that get looped into the gangs. So that kind of like cracker or that act of kindness is an enticing way in, and it's really kind of like a recruiting way in some ways, but it's not intended as that, but because they legitimately don't want to see like a little kid hurt. There's like, they're not like, people are human beings and don't want to see 100%. Kids hurt, right? But it's also a way of, this is like a series of interactions that were not necessarily anyone asking anything of me, that kind of stuff.
It just they become your friends, and this is what it is. But I've had like we had friends that their older siblings would end up in the gangs. So then they would come back and they would tell you stories.
Yeah.
And then based on those stories, you form your own kind of opinion and viewpoints, right? Like, so they would talk about, you know, oh, they all got in a car and they all went up to like this side of the city and they were all, you know, slowly driving by and they were looking for somebody. So when you hear things like that, you're like, okay, whoa. Is there a car driving really slowly? Like,
Yeah.
Is there something that's about to happen? And it's not because somebody told you to look out for it. It's because you hear stories.
Yeah.
It's not that you're in it or anything.
For us, it was a tunnel, but carry on. Like, don't go through that tunnel. Because on the other,
There was a forest.
Yeah.
And one day I just had to go through the tunnel because I was running late and, you know.
Oh my God, we had that with Old Markham Road. They were like stories of like Old Markham Road. And if you drive out there at night and there are people there and they're going to come, they're going to ride, like they're going to ram you. And I remember getting my first car. And my girlfriend and I were like, let's go.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we nearly wet ourselves because at one point we were going under a bridge and all of a sudden this car, high beams turn on and it starts following us. And we were like, oh, we're going to die.
Yeah.
And whether it was just a prank because people are so used to, you know, geniuses like us coming and doing ridiculous things like that. And it's just a prank that they play. Or if the stories are true, you don't know. But in that moment, you're terrified. But you can't help but want to experience it.
So you're in the survival mode when you were in Cedar Bay. You don't realize it then.
You don't.
But you're in survival mode.
Sure. Yeah. I get it. I mean, as a child,
You're looking out for cars that are passing by slowly. You're
so
looking out for danger.
Yeah, but you don't realize.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's normal to you.
So one of the big things, so we're in Vaughan now. And, you know, not long ago we had that situation at Jane and Rutherford. I drove by it as it was happening.
Get my back onto it. I see those condos right in my backyard. Yeah.
So I drove by
What situation are we talking
shooting.
There was 5 people that were shot in a boardroom at Jane and Rutherford. It was a dispute, I think, between one of the tenants and the
a resident,
the committee, some kind of committee, the board,
condo board.
Right.
Yeah, condo board. That
Right.
was
I
it.
remember that now.
Yeah. So I drove
It
by
was
that.
in the news recently, yeah.
Yeah, it was in December, just before the holidays, maybe a week before Christmas. And I remember turning left onto Jane coming home from the Vaughan Mills area, and I see all of these lights. And as I'm driving by, I noticed 3 cars parked on Jane Street, and then police cars next to them. And instinctually, I was like, oh my God, we either have a hostage situation, somebody's threatening suicide, or there's an active shooting. And then the entire drive home, I'm like, are you insane? Who thinks of things like this?
Yeah.
And I'm having an entire discussion with myself of all the reasons why this is the only explanation. And I came home.
Yeah. What were there?
I told my husband. My husband's like, this is not normal. Like, there could be an emergency. I'm like, no, you don't understand. There's no reason for that many police cars to be there. There's no reason for there to be an ambulance bus. There's no reason for cars to be abandoned on Jane Street when you're not allowed to park on Jane Street. And he's like, oh, but, you know, maybe it was there. I said, no, I've seen bomb squad.
Yeah.
There were no, you know, armored. There was none of this. There was no that. And he's looking at me. He goes, this is not, like, people don't think like this. And sure enough, half an hour later, it was like, we have an active situation.
Yeah.
So you is it because of your experience?
Yeah. Like, you've seen things like this before. And
It's like that synaptic hardwiring. It's like when you hear a loud noise and you associate it with danger, then you hear every time you hear a loud noise, you jump, right? And so
there's this association
these-
with sound or a picture or an image and danger.
she's seen similarities.
yeah, like there's just certain ways where, like, there's a certain way that a police car will park when it's about to, like, catch somebody.
Yeah.
Like, if you've ever noticed, sometimes you'll see 2 police cars that are facing each other on the same side of the street, which is not normal. And it's because they want to be able to go.
Yeah.
If, regardless of the direction the person they're seeking runs.
Yeah. You're 100% right.
But
I used to work
until
for
you've
police.
seen it,
Yeah, until you see
You
it.
don't know.
Yeah. You kind of know what
Because
the
otherwise they
setup
park
is.
behind each other like normal
So
cars.
was this thing that happened in Vaughan a big deal because, especially a bigger deal because it happened in Vaughan?
Probably.
Like, if this happened in Cedarburg, okay, it happened in Cedarburg again.
Yeah.
Was that a big deal because it happened in Vaughan, or bigger deal?
I
because it happened-
mean, it's a big deal to have people
Anywhere.
got down in their house, like anywhere you go. You know what I mean? Anywhere that you go, to have somebody come and knock on your door and to shoot you, that's kind of a big deal. I mean, I don't even think those kinds of things happen there. Like, they never showed up at your door and it generally happens.
It's actually outside the community.
Yeah, they don't generally.
Yeah.
Like, it's not usually that way.
Yeah.
Or at least not that I'd ever heard of. But I mean, just it was a very odd situation. Like it was a very, very odd situation for like a dispute over a utility room and, you know, certain thing. And I mean, mental health issues contribute to that as well. And
so when you were this time, you were in Cedar Bay, you're growing up, you're observing these things, you're making associations to, you know, situations and what's dangerous and what's not dangerous. You know, you look back on it. How old were you when you moved out of Cedar Bay?
14.
Okay. So that's a lot of influence, right? That's a lot of time that you're there. And where did you move after that?
Oh my, let me tell you. So I went from Cedar Bay to York Mills and Leslie. Okay. So I went from like, I should have been going to Cedar Bay Collegiate to I went to York Mills Collegiate.
Okay.
So I moved from like, you know, let's say the ghetto into like Beverly Hills 90210. Legit. I had no idea people lived like that either.
Princess of Bel-Air.
Yeah, I had no idea people lived like that either.
I got it.
Okay.
I got it.
And you go to like a place where kids are getting cars for their birthdays.
I know.
What?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Like people drive to school?
Mm-hmm.
And it was so strange. And now I'm like the ghetto kid in the fancy school. So like the
What were you before in the ghetto?
So actually, you know what's interesting is, again, back to my parents, and my mom did whatever it was that she could to ensure that this environment did not poison, let's say, us. And when my brother started kindergarten, my mother was able to get us into a school on the right side of Kingston Road. So by 4th grade, I was in school with the fancy kids.
Oh.
So I was literally on the wrong side of Kingston Road going to school.
But she was able to get your boundaries for that other school?
Because they had a daycare there, I believe that because my brother needed childcare,
so
they were able to
do the
get
flex
us
boundaries
in so that the daycare was in the school, so they didn't have to do what they did with me and pick us up and drive, like walk us home. But I got there and I was the kid from...
So it was a better influence.
It was a great school, tiny little school, you know, only 20 of us in a class, only one class of each grade.
Oh, wow.
But when you're the kid from the wrong side of Kingston Road, you don't get invited to birthdays because those parents aren't comfortable because they don't know who your parents are.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right.
You don't.
But that's what I'm saying. I feel like it's a lot of the same stuff
It is.
we get there. Like even you talked about it, like somebody in your family married a villager. And they were like,
but not a villager, you know what? But it's just that that's
But now you're the villager.
Oh, I wasn't the villager. I was like
maybe less than the villager. Who knows?
Oh, I was the danger. You know, I was that.
You've been on a side where people are looking at the other side, going, "We don't hang with them," and now you're on the other side where people are like, "We don't hang with you."
Yeah. It's all.
And what's the difference?
I don't think anything, to be honest. There's no difference in that sense. There's no discrimination is discrimination is discrimination.
Yeah.
Like regardless of what it is. And I can tell you in every aspect of what I've done, whether it's been in business, whether it's been as a child or whatever else, there has been discrimination and reasons why people don't want to do business with me. Whether it's because I'm like, as a woman, you know, generally speaking, men want to speak to my husband because clearly he's the man who makes the decisions. Fine. He writes the checks. He signs the checks. But like at the end of the day, I run the day-to-day operations. Like there are many questions that you're going to want to ask me, not him.
But can I ask you, going back to that, when you realized, did you realize that you're not being invited to the party?
My parents were
You didn't know that you're not being invited to the party?
I was never at birthday parties. I was just never at the birthday parties with those kids. And it's not until later that you realize.
So when you first realized this, was there ever like a thought of like of injustice? Like what was wrong with me then? There was nothing wrong with me.
No.
But you never felt there was anything wrong with you.
No, because my
But
parents...
somebody looked at you and said, you belong here.
So many people looked at me and said that throughout the entire course of my life. It was worse during high school.
Were they right about like not wanting to hang with you?
No.
Why? Right?
Like,
In fact, they missed out.
sure. And I mean, at the end of the
Isn't that
day,
interesting?
like, why? You know what I mean? Why? Like,
Yeah, it's just perception. It's a money. I remember when I'm hearing you speak right now, it just reminded me of when I lived, I moved from a part of Bramalea into this house in Brampton. and it had like wallpaper. I'm like, what? It has like wallpaper, and it had like a powder room when you came in. And this was like a big deal for my family. This was like, it was a semi, and we're like, what the heck? This is a big deal. Yeah. But I was the poorest kid in the area, and I didn't get invited for those because I didn't have the same clothes. I didn't have the same shoes. And here I am living in the quote unquote fanciest house that we've ever lived in.
Yep.
And I still wasn't included, but I was very aware of that. And so there's like, I think there's this, I don't know, there's a superficiality, I think, that's taught, I think, that about these divides that reinforces it. And the illusion of money sometimes of what that value is, at least in that experience for mine. But yeah, like there's just...
In high school, it was money.
Yeah. In high school, it would become money. Yeah, for sure.
In grade school, like being on the wrong side of Kingston Road. So I didn't even realize what was going on until I had my daughter.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh.
So you think it's like the kids adopting the parents' kind of perceptions?
Well, as a parent, I can understand.
Feel comfortable.
Yeah. As a parent, I can understand.
Say, I don't want you to hang with. You're careful to protect your kid, aren't you?
I can see why they would be uncomfortable, right? Like coming from, the part that we were from, like it's scary. You know what I mean? Like I remember 8th grade, one of the boys in our school got arrested because he brought his mom's hash to school. Like these are the types of people who lived on the wrong side of Kingston Road, right? So as a parent, you don't know if these are parents who partake.
So you're just being cautious.
Yes.
Is that what they were being?
Yeah.
So is that caution or is that discrimination?
I think it's ignorance. And it's a lack of willingness to actually put in the effort to understand.
Yeah, to be curious.
They don't have the time to sift through going, hey, so do you have your mom's hash on you? No, okay, you're good. Come to the party.
There's 9 girls in the class. Right. Like you don't have the ability for the one kid that's new to take a minute to like say hi to the parent when they come to pick them up from school.
If they could have only done that to get to know you a little bit better.
Like you don't notice that like my parents are actually well put together and, they are responsible, we're on time, we don't look like the kids who come from those types of environments because it's a very visible difference when you look at the children who come from those homes where there is that clear neglect versus people like my parents who are there because they didn't know any better and they were doing what they could to manage with 2 children and trying figure out this new world that they have now
were simply there just because it was a landing spot at the time, right?
I just find it so interesting because when I hear you talk about it, it's just my brain's just popping off thinking of things, and it's like there's a hierarchy of what's acceptable dysfunction, right? So like I've seen some super affluent families that are like they have the poster child of like the career and the the nuclear family, like all the little societal check boxes that you can think of. The whole perception is there, the whole picture. But man, the dysfunction and chaos, I wouldn't want my child to go into these homes.
We had many.
And that's the thing. Like, it's just like, that's also dysfunction, but why is that dysfunction not?
But hold on, it's interesting. You say that, and then you said, but if you just looked at us visibly.
Yep.
Yeah.
But then visibly is also not.
Right. Yep.
The check.
Yep.
Isn't that interesting?
It is. And you don't know.
When it comes to discrimination, and that's kind of like my thought here is like, I see it.
We all discriminate.
Constantly.
Yeah,
100%.
Constantly.
Like whether
100%.
you were in Iran, it was happening. And then as you moved inside of, forget about cities, on the other side of the road.
Yeah.
And I know it happens.
It does.
It's real.
Yeah. Your insurance changes.
Your insurance
because your postal code.
Oh,
it's
my
a real
God.
thing.
I don't want to talk about that. My goodness.
I know, right?
They're not being subjective. It
is pure discrimination.
They take stats on it, though. They take stats.
It's nonsense.
But my young son isn't going to get a car because the cost of the insurance
for a young man in this area
is higher than the value of the car itself.
Yeah.
So we're like, pass, and he's riding around in a bus for that reason. Yeah. So he doesn't think it's right, so he will wait. Anyway, the point is, though, there are these, what do you want to call them? These lines that we draw in this, like these borders, and we do it. Why do we have borders? To protect ourselves and our families, and
of course.
So everyone builds these borders, and then these borders turn into bias.
Yeah.
But on the inside of the border, of whether it's something visible or whether it's something geographic or language or country, on the inside of that border is still a human being.
Yep.
And that person's just fine.
Yep. Yep. And I mean, there are people in this world, a very, very small number of people in this world who are maybe not so great from the beginning.
And a little bit misplaced, yeah.
So, like such a small.
And you've been on both sides of that.
Sure.
You've seen it like where someone is kind of on your side. Not you didn't do it yourself. I haven't heard one word come from you where you were doing the judging, you know? I find that to be very unique about you because, you know, people around you were doing it. And so that's another thing I'm curious about to find out more. But you've seen it.
I judged, but the other way around. So me, like in high school, right? You're judging these kids from these. What
are you saying? Like, you guys are so spoiled? Or like, what are you saying?
What is wrong with them? Was like my whole thought process of like, what is wrong with you?
What looked wrong?
You have everything you could possibly want, and you bitch and you complain and you're unhappy and you're unsatisfied and you think you don't have enough and like, oh my God, my daddy didn't buy me the right car. Like, and mentally I couldn't understand what the hell was wrong with these people. And, you know, was it the whole slew of them? No, it might have been 2 or 3 kids out of like 500 who had this level of entitlement. But for me, I just assumed they were all the same. Mm-hmm. They were all these kids that, you know, daddy
collegiate.
Oh, excuse me, daddy didn't buy you the right Mercedes. Like, ooh, right? And it was again. Yeah, and it's just like, oh, so we judged because, and it's because we didn't understand. Yeah, I look at it today, and I can understand that the reason some of these kids are the way that they are is, imagine you have parents who are never there, ever there. They go on vacation without you. They leave you with a nanny. They're constantly traveling for business. They're not there for your birthdays. Like, how would you feel? Like absolute garbage. So what do? You treat everybody else around you the only way you know how, which is like absolute garbage. And if your parents are there and all that they're doing is tossing money at you because they can't be bothered with you, well, then you know what? You better get me the right thing that I asked for, excuse you. But you don't see it then, because for me, I come from a family where even though my parents divorced, my parents never fought over custody. There was never any kind of, like, my parents decided that their relationship had ended, fine. But we saw my dad whenever we wanted to see my dad. My dad could come and see us whenever he wanted to see us. There was never anything like that. So we came from an environment that was so full of love that we never felt like we didn't have. Right? Until you see the kid who gets a Mercedes. And then you're like, oh,
we don't have that.
Well, I guess
But we have love. That's okay, though.
But you don't understand
the value of that.
Yeah. When you have people who, my dad busted his butt every September so that my brother and I would have new, you know, Nike shoes or silver jeans or Root sweatshirts for the start of school.
Go buy your stuff that you need for school.
It wasn't easy for them, but they did it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I didn't have 14 pairs of jeans, but I had
13, you were okay.
You know, 2. And it was enough where I didn't feel like I looked like the kid who didn't have the same kind of things. But when you don't have those major voids, it's hard to understand why people behave that way.
Yeah.
So I can see why maybe if you don't understand why a decent human being would choose to live on the wrong side of Kingston Road, why you might decide that, oh, clearly they're all the same. Let's just, because there's no reality with it.
So do you think that it's, and this is like a hypothetical, right?
Yeah.
Like, what if you never lived in Cedarburg? What if you started living in York Mills?
Oh my God.
Would you have been one, do you think, have been one of them?
No, because I don't think I could ever have been one of them, because my family situation, none of that was the same. But I will tell you this. So I own and I operate a property management company. And if I did not grow up where I grew up with the experiences that I had and the people that I grew up around, I would not be where I am today. My businesses would not have survived. They would not have thrived at all. So my husband and I started buying small residential, like triplexes, fourplexes, things like that, in like really distressed small towns in Eastern Ontario. And, you know, the tenant profiles that we inherit were colorful because we were buying properties that
Colorful.
stressed.
That's interesting.
Colorful. There's no other way to put it other than colorful. Like there's, yeah, I mean, hey, it's
All kinds of walks of life. Yeah.
And if I
diverse or like different colored people?
No, like I'm talking diverse.
Sorry,
They were all
diverse.
It's like Eastern Ontario, right? So generally speaking, they're Canadians, right? It wasn't a very multicultural town. It's a small town, but like very colorful, very different walks of life, different aspects of, you know, drug dealers and prostitutes and, you know, just insanity. Where if I was somebody who grew up at York Mills and I walked
I'm not buying this.
And no, I didn't get to see anything before we bought it. My husband did. I didn't. So I got there and it was like, what? If I didn't have the experiences that I had, I would not have been able to survive what came with stabilizing a building like that. Like to be able to get up into somebody's face who is clearly an addict or clearly a criminal and to confidently be able to be like, you know what, try me. Let's go. Let's play. And it was because I had that confidence of like, you're from some small town. Like, do you know where I come from? And they get scared because clearly I'm not stable. And instability is scary, especially to people who are expecting predictability. They're expecting that the person who bought my building is another one of these hoity-toity fancy city people who follow the rules because they know
as instability. I see it as clarity.
For them, I'm unpredictable.
But it's unpredictable because it's not the norm for that in their experience. But
I mean, she's yelling at me. I mean, she's, you know, up in my face, and then the police would show up, and now I'm all like, I don't understand what's happening. And I'm 5 feet tall. I weigh 100 pounds. Like, you know, it's one of those situations where had I not been in an environment where I'd seen or been able to identify at what point the danger was not worth the challenge, or be able to recognize that, you know, like I had a tenant whose son was a very large distributor of cocaine in Eastern Ontario. And she stopped paying my rent. I was like, that's it. We're getting her out of here. We're done. And it was a very big confrontation. Half the street had come out and told my husband they need to get me out of the city because her son is so-and-so and he's going to like, you know. And I stuck my ground and he showed up 45 minutes later, paid my rent. And Mom was gone by Monday. And nobody understood why. I said, because he's a businessman. I'm a liability. It's not worth the business to attack me. It's not worth the business to challenge me. They'll move on. But if I didn't have those experiences, I wouldn't have those understandings, nor would I have the confidence to be able to do that.
Sometimes people who are in those, let's call them the ghetto or these centers inside our cities, they might find that you know, because of the environment and their, call it starting point, that they're further behind.
Yeah, for sure.
Because of access to opportunities.
Yeah, for sure.
But you're saying, if I'm reading you right, that it's because you were there that was the opportunity for you to learn certain things and develop certain strengths.
Yep. So
where's
both of those things?
I think
are
it's both true.
Both are true. So because
how could they both be true?
Because when we buy real estate.
Okay.
You only have so much money to be able to buy real estate, right? Like you need a down payment, you need to do these things. So if I grew up in York Mills, I would have access to a lot of capital where I would be able to buy lots of property.
Okay.
Great. So I would have an opportunity to very quickly make a whole lot of money, generate a whole lot of assets, to have a very comfortable net worth because I have a network of people who would fund my deals, who trust me, who have that ability. And if I lose $100,000, so what?
Yeah, okay, I got it.
I don't have
York
that.
Mills, you have, right? So now you don't have the network.
So we don't have a network of people. We don't have friends. We don't have family who is going to like, you know, mortgage their house to go and help us start it. Like we didn't have any of those things. But because of my experiences, we were able to push through and stabilize properties that bankrupted people who had that.
Right. Because of
those, because
the knowledge
you learn, you have street smarts. There's nothing else to call it other than street smarts. You have the ability to read human beings and respond to those humans in a language that they understand.
to seek a solution too, right? And
a mutually beneficial solution for all.
Yep.
If you want to do bad things in my property, I am your best friend and I am here every week and I am super nice to you. It's not that I go in there and I fight with you. I go in there and I want to be like the best landlord you've ever had. I want to be there every week to make sure everything's okay. And it's very difficult to run an operation that's not legit if the person who owns the house is there every bloody Monday. She won't go away. She wants to plant flowers. She wants to do this. It's getting in the way of business. Let's go.
Right. So back to the question I'm asking,
which
is that you say you've got this, the way you are is because of where you come from.
Yeah.
And not just Cedarburg, all the way back maybe to Iran and having the parents that you have.
My parents, 100%.
You've repeated this many times, who've walked you through many circumstances of instability, including their own separation, which can be very unstabilizing, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. It's like the number one cause out there sometimes for like kids who are, dysfunctional because like their families are dysfunctional. So you've been in moments that there's a lot of instability or dysfunction, but you've also seen and been shown that you can go through dysfunction and levels of instability still feeling very secure.
Yep. 100%.
How's that done?
How is it done?
Yeah. How do you go through all this instability, creating an environment that feels stable?
So with my parents, I can only speak from my own experience. And for them, I think the only mandate...
What did they do?
They tried to keep things as normal as humanly possible for us. So my dad and I were very, very close. Right. Very, very close. And, my mother, if she was like any of the moms that I witnessed when I saw friends of mine whose parents were going through divorce, would have used that as a vehicle or a tool to negotiate. Oh, she's close to you, you're close to her. Well, I'm going to withhold from you until you
pay this or do
this and give me the... They never did that. My mother's whole thing was, okay, you know what? You want to see your dad? Okay, no problem. You want him to come here? Okay, no problem. It didn't mean that they sat there and they were the best of friends or anything like that. No, but they didn't fight. You know what I mean? They didn't fight in front of us. They didn't talk down about each other in front of us. They didn't ever sit there and say, oh, your dad was this or, oh, your mom was that. And if we ever complained, it was like, excuse you. That's your parent. That's your mother. That's your father. How dare you?
In spite of them having potentially their own differences.
They had their own situations, but there was never this allowance, like the expectations that we had as a family when we were all under one roof were still there when we were under separate roofs.
Yeah.
The respect, the communication, and all of those things. And because that expectation was there, the access was also there, right? Because how can you expect a child...
Access to what?
To the parent, to one another, like to access to the family.
The relationships. Yeah.
Which wasn't common.
That's the root of the stability.
In my opinion,
I think
of course.
So.
I think that's the biggest challenge is that you have, or at least from what I witnessed with the friends of mine whose parents went through divorce when we were in high school, they were nasty divorces, right? Dad cheated on mom is angry, everybody wants to get back at everybody else, and when there's money to fight over, well, then there's money to fight over. So they would use the kids as pawns, right? Mm-hmm. Mom would talk really poorly about dad, and then the kids would, start attacking dad, or they didn't want to see. And it creates this mental instability. So like already everything's weird, right?
Yeah,
like already
you're going
everything.
through something at 13 or whatever.
And now all of a sudden you're not supposed to talk to your dad because your dad is evil and your dad is this and your dad is that. And it's so much more compounded versus having two adults who look at you and say, okay, this is our problem. Mm-hmm. This is not a you problem. Mm-hmm. We are still your parents. We still love you. We're still the same human beings. This has not changed. We just can't coexist together.
Yeah.
So
I just want to speak to this for a sec, because like what you're speaking to, I had a conversation about a year ago on another podcast, and it was called I said, what do you want to talk about? And I said, I want to talk about disconnection in families. Yeah. Because that's what you're speaking to, and I think the foundation of what your experience and what has made you successful or resilient or whatever these words we want to attach for achievement or moving forward is really come from a foundation of connection. Yeah. And so, and I specialized in separation and divorce in, one of my careers. And what you're speaking to there it resonates a lot for me, because there is a lot of emotional harm and a lot of damage that can come from separation and divorce. And the way our system navigates it really compounds and exacerbates it. Yeah. And it's incredibly heartbreaking. And so, but coupled with that, even with intact families, we're so overwhelmed with like jobs and trying to get money on or earn enough money to get food on the table. Like everything is so much more expensive. And a lot of families I speak to, it's not a matter of them not working enough. They're underemployed. They're working too much and still not making enough. Yeah. And so it's that disconnection that is so, and the disconnection that is causing a lot of this unhappiness. Even with those wealthy kids, it's the same thing, that the families that are working too much just to like basic ends meet, and then they have the families that are working too much that have so much abundance. It's the same issue as disconnection, right? 100%. And I think that is one of the core things, is when you have that solid foundation, no matter what chaos is circling around you, whether you're in the quote unquote ghetto or in the affluent areas, whatever the chaos is, you're good because you have that foundation of connection. Like, that's kind of like how I'm perceiving your story. How does that resonate?
The best example I can give you is, my dad passed away in 2019. My dad had lung disease. And then the last 3 months of his life, he actually ended up with tuberculosis, which really accelerated things, and just, it was horrible. Yeah. I couldn't even put it any other way.
Yeah.
Horrible. But nobody knew he had lung disease. So he didn't tell any of us for 5 years. And then he got sick and he couldn't, things weren't normal. So I went with him to his respirologist. And his respirologist was like, "Do you have any idea what's going on?" I said, "No, what's happening?" "Your dad's dying." Just like that. And I thought, oh, no way. Like, this is not happening. So I took my dad to Toronto General. We got him into the ER. I called my mom. I let her know what was happening. They admitted my dad because they couldn't figure out, there were a whole bunch of compounding issues. Like, my dad was having issues. He couldn't swallow, and he had all kinds of things that he was saying. He had stomach problems and whatever else. And so they admitted him. And on day 3, so my parents, they split up. My parents they didn't talk. As normal as like they tried to keep things for us, they didn't communicate.
It's at a level of disconnect, I see.
A little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was what they needed to do to be able to keep the rest
some
of it
autonomy
for us.
Right.
Yeah.
Day 3, my mom shows up at the hospital. My dad and I are sitting, talking. He's laying in his hospital bed. I'm sitting next to him. We're talking. And all of a sudden, my dad stops talking. And I turn and I look. And my mom is standing in the doorway. And she was downtown. She had an appointment. She came. She asked my dad how he was doing, how he was feeling. She asked me how I was doing. Is there anything I can do? No, we're okay. All right. And she went. And when my dad was discharged from the hospital, and we figured out, so he had an ulcer, which was one of the reasons they thought he had stomach cancer, thank God. It was an ulcer. They put him on his medication, things like that. They had to change his diet. And every Sunday, my mom would cook for my dad and send food with my brother to my father. This is a woman.
Connection.
Yeah.
Who, you know what I mean? And
you're caring, and that's caring for the child, because the child's an extension of that parent. So when you care for the parent, you care for the child. And it's just,
there is no woman that I know who separated from a spouse and had, a relationship like my parents had, which was virtually non-existent, other than my brother and I being kind of their kids and in the middle, who would sit and intentionally prepare meals that he enjoys.
Yes.
That are within the restrictions that he needs to heal.
Yeah, because ulcers are, so reactive.
Every single week. And she did that until the day he was admitted into the hospital and didn't come home. Like, this is the kind of stability that they created for us within the means that they had. No matter what was happening, that you are my family and you are here and we are a unit was there.
What do you think? I mean, I guess it's a question to ask them, but I'm asking you. What do you think, like, it takes to do that?
I couldn't even imagine.
Like, does it take money? No. What does it take?
No, you have
what is it that we don't have? What is it that we don't have to be able to do it?
It's outside of yourself.
What is it that we don't have to be able to do what your mom did or what your dad's done for you to create the stability? It wasn't money.
No, it wasn't money.
What was it?
My mom comes from a family of, there's 5 siblings. They were surrounded by their own family, and she came into
and she came from affluence too, your mom, right?
And she came into a world where it was just her husband, and her kids.
Right.
And she gave up everything so that her kids could have a better life. And there's no way that wasn't going to happen. And my mother always put us first. And I think that's one of the things, at least in divorce, gets missed, is mom and dad are so hurt and so angry that they forget about their kids.
But they were like this with you even during the other transitions.
Of course, because you're taking a kid in the middle of a war and in the middle of like a whole situation, and you're
because that's not the average way of doing things.
No,
people who are going through a lot of instability themselves, how do they create stability for somebody like you? That's truly breaking cycles. Yeah. That is unbelievably powerful.
I think it's a choice, though, because
is it just that? That's it. They just made a choice.
It's choice. I know for me and my experience with I did something very similar when I divorced, and for a very long time anyway. And so, and what I found was there's this culture of you're divorcing, so now you're separate, and there's this cultural pressure or societal pressure to be like, almost treat each other as adversaries. Yeah. And so, and at times you are in an adversarial stance because you're going through a conflict and you have to remind yourself, okay, we're not adversaries, we're on the same team, but we're having a very serious disagreement right now. Yeah. And I know for me, and I feel that it might have been the same in your mom's experience. It's a series of choices. Yeah. And I know what I had to do perpetually was, whose needs am I meeting? Whose needs? My need for conflict, my need to be right, my need to win over you. Yep. No, that doesn't trump the needs of the children. And so sometimes that has to win because you have to assert yourself, or you have to get, your position across. But 9 times out of 10, I think what we need to be supporting each other is whose needs are we meeting as the collective of the family, not as the individual. And that's a hard thing to do. It's hard.
I get that when you've got as many stakes as you have in the game with children. That's big stakes, right? Yeah. And they mean a lot to you at that time. But they demonstrated this behavior consistently in other situations. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm noticing is that, when you moved, and then I have another question I got to ask you.
As many as you want.
But what I wanted to actually get to before this is great to hear you say this, because it tells a lot about kind of, Lena, why you are the way you are. And a lot of people go through some of the same experiences that you have, don't really have the same outlook or outcome. And so what I'm trying to figure out is how to bridge those two gaps, because you're in a place like, you look well, you sound well, you got a great outlook, a great attitude. Look at how you take care of people. Look at the business that you're in today. You're taking care of people, and you come from places where it doesn't seem to be very present. Yeah. But there was one place that was very present. So, okay, fine. That's there. I got it now. But then you yourself said, and, you talk about where I'm going with it is, was it discrimination, or was it being disconnected when the lady in Ottawa said what she said?
Oh.
How do you know the difference between being disconnected and just discrimination? Is there really a difference?
I think there is. Like, the disconnect is the ignorance, right? It's just
that's all it is.
It's just pure and complete ignorance.
They're disconnected.
They are so...
That's all.
Yeah.
I didn't like you when it was happening. I'll just say it. But they're just a little disconnected.
Yeah, very much so. Very, very much so.
And if they just knew a little bit more, it would go away.
Or be willing to just experience a little bit more. Just be willing to experience. Yes, change is hard. Okay, it's very difficult if you come from an area where you're not used to seeing people that look like me. And now they're there, and they're working there, and you feel like they're getting in your way. Fine. but like be willing to experience what comes with those changes. And maybe it's not so bad, but they're so set on this is not okay that they're not willing to even experience the good that comes
But maybe
with it.
they gave it a chance and they had some bad experiences.
Maybe. So
I often see those statements as invitations to be curious, right? Like, and that I think when people can have conversations about those things, like, you know, why do you feel that way? Like, what has happened? And sometimes it's we don't know where it comes from. It comes from there's a whole plethora of reasons where it comes from, but
there's so many examples I could give you that are just like, I used to do consulting for a property management company in Ottawa. And the gentleman who owned the company came to me one day and said, hey, do you have any family who might be immigrating to Canada that might be willing to like clean the apartments? And I thought, okay. I was like, I'm not sure I understand your question.
There's a lot of stuff in there.
yeah,
my response was, I don't think I understand your question.
Oh,
you're a property owner. Do you know anyone?
You know what I mean? Like, what do you mean? Do I have family? Like, I genuinely didn't understand.
They weren't asking you because you're a property manager.
No,
They're
I'm
asking you
consulting.
because you might have immigrant family.
They clearly asked, do I have anybody? Do I have any family who's immigrating to Canada who might be interested? I was just like, I don't understand your question. Well, you know, like, your family's not from here, right? Like, clearly, no, they are not. Well, are any of them immigrating and looking for work? I said, well, yeah, but like, you know, they're not really looking to like clean apartments. Oh, well, work is work. And I just kind of looked at the gentleman and I was like, okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. Why?
The curiosity, though.
Was it a tennis racket?
Yeah, right. It was a tennis racket that I threatened that poor boy with.
I just had this image.
But I said, I'm going to ask you a question. Okay. I said, why do you think that my family who would be immigrating to Canada would want to clean your buildings? Well, they need work, right? And I thought, okay. So I asked him, I said, do you know what is required to immigrate to Canada right now?
Yeah.
And he kind of looked at me, he goes, what do you mean?
It's a heavy load.
I was like, you can't just show up and be like, hi, I want to live in Canada. Like, there are requirements. You have to have an education that can be used here. You have to have money that you're bringing here. Are you bringing in, like, there's different ways of getting
bank
visas.
account amounts.
Yeah, like, there are different types of visas that you can come and you can get and things like that. Like, short of coming as a refugee, like, it's not just, hi, I want to move here, so welcome. Like, you have to bring something with you that's going to contribute to Canadian society. And he kind of looked at me, he goes, what? I said, okay, let me make this as clear for you as I can. I have two cousins who are immigrating. They are both engineers. They're both coming here on student visas because they're going to get their PhDs. And one of my cousin's husbands are also coming on a business visa because they're opening up a business here in Canada. That's how they were permitted residence. So no, they're not going to be cleaning your buildings. And it really is sometimes just a matter of there's this
the
like
tennis racket back there.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
It's just, but it's just.
But that's the lens that he saw.
They don't understand. They think it's the 80s and we've got all these people who have to escape war and now they're all coming here and they'll do whatever it needs to take because my parents did that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? My dad.
And there's still people.
happening.
There's still people.
There are people who have to do that.
Yeah.
And in the industry that I'm in, right, property management, like you go onto Facebook groups and there's so much discrimination against, oh, do not rent to these refugees. You're never going to see your money. Yeah, right. Maybe 1 out of 10. Because these are people who have fled the worst possible conditions and they will do whatever it takes to never have to go back.
You know, one thing that struck me that you said earlier, and I don't know if you use this as a technique or not intentionally.
Okay.
But you talked about when you have a certain kind of tenant.
Yep.
And you do a couple of things. It turns that tenant from being a tenant who is like, you know, a C tenant to an A tenant or gets out. What is the root of that, would you say?
Okay. So I believe that as human beings, we are fundamentally good people. Okay. Fundamentally, everything that we want to do well, and we want to do to be recognized as a good person. right? Because generally speaking,
this wholeheartedly.
I do, because nobody's going to go out there and be like, hey, guess what? I just stole $45,000 from this unsuspecting investor, right? Like, you don't want people to know that you're a crappy human being or that you make bad choices.
Right.
We make bad choices. And because we are good people, we feel ashamed. We feel regret. We feel all kinds of feelings that cause us to want to be better. And then there's a small fragment of the population who just don't care. They are just not good people. And that's okay. You know what I mean? We're never going to get 100%, but we'll probably get 97, 95. You know what I mean? So when you come into a place where, let's say it's a multi-residential property, because that's what we buy multi-residential. When you have one or two bad people, and again, this comes back to the experiences of growing up in an area where there's a lot of not so great people.
Seemingly.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is you have one or two groups who control the majority of what goes on, and you have the choice, in order to survive, to either leave or
Acclimate.
to conform, comply, to play along, whatever that might be, and however that might look, right? So my parents chose to just mind their own business, keep their head down, not get involved in anything. They go to work, they come home, that's it. Like, you don't make friends kind of outside of people that you find within your own.
Didn't take a side.
No, like, it was, you see nothing. Blinders, this is it. Like, these are my blinders. I'm going to my car. That's it. I see nothing else around me. And then
They stayed neutral.
Yeah. And you have other people who choose to participate in order to be accepted so that they're not attacked. And in these buildings where you have, let's say, one tenant who is genuinely just a horrible human being, you're going to have another two or three who are playing along because they don't want the trouble. And the minute you give those people the opportunity to be good, they're going to take it, because they don't want to live like that. They don't want to be these people. They don't want to be in an environment where their kids are exposed to the guy downstairs who's selling drugs. And the reason they were like that is because the person prior to me didn't care. It was about that dollar. It was about that bottom line.
What do you call that? What you just described? What would you call that?
The person who didn't care
No,
prior to me.
the act of doing that to them, giving them that opportunity.
I don't treating them like a human. I don't know. Like, I don't know what to call it. Just being a human being. And I don't know if it's because growing up, like, my parents are educated people. You know what I mean? My dad was a physicist. My mom was a nurse. Like, these are educated human beings who came into an environment and were treated like absolute garbage by garbage. And when you see that, like, I don't know, I can't stand it. I can't stand to see other people who are just marked as not worth it.
So now,
So it's a choice.
right?
Yeah.
Yep. Tell me.
So I'm just curious.
Yep.
You said earlier,
Yep.
before we started recording,
Yep.
that when you see men with beards,
Yep.
you have a reaction.
Oh, so this was when I was little. My parents would tell me that, like, when we were on a bus or something and there was a very big bearded man, like, I would get, as a child, I would cry and they would scare me and whatever else. And I'm sure that's just based on the environment that we were in, right?
I don't know. I'm asking.
Now, no, my brother has a beard.
Okay.
No, this is not something that's a long-term thing. There are a lot of things. No, this is not an
But you've
ongoing.
been there.
But
So I'm
as a
curious.
child, they would tell me. I don't recall these things, but my dad would tell me, like, they would be on a bus and a bearded man would be on the bus, and, like, I would just scream, like, I would just start to cry, and they wouldn't know why or what was happening. And it's just, as a child, right? You're in an environment, especially for us, right? There's so much upheaval and movement and whatnot that new things, different things, it's scary.
And plus, like, facial hair for kids, they really look for facial cues, and it hides a lot of visual stimulus, so then they're not able to assess. So it becomes scary if they're not used to it.
How did you overcome that?
I don't know. I didn't know it was a problem. You know what? Like, so it's funny. A lot of these things I didn't even know it was a problem. I didn't know until it was. Like, there's another thing, right? Like basements. I don't go into basements. When we go to view property, if that basement's not finished, I am not going in there. And my husband's like, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "The smell just, I can't deal with it." And whether that is something that comes from, you know, when you're fleeing and you're running and you're doing all these other things. Like, I'm sure that there are places that were temporarily that, you know, probably smelt the same way. Or areas that, you know, smelt a certain way or looked a certain way or the lighting was a certain way that, you know, in my brain are still tied to danger that, like, there's no way I'm going into a basement that's not finished, especially if it smells musky. No, thank you. I don't need to know. The inspector will take a look, and if there's something wrong, he will let me know.
And then
I will go. Like, I have such a strong, no way, Jose. Like, not going to happen. You could not pay me to go down there. No.
Because you might have had some bad experiences.
For sure. Like, there's
So
no
that's what I'm
logical
asking,
explanation.
Lena. So what about the lady who didn't want to stand behind lines of brown people because they just know that is not acceptable? Why is that not okay and this is okay? Why?
Well, because it's a basement. That's not a human being.
It's still a
So,
feeling.
like, you know, yeah,
still a
but like,
feeling.
is the basement upset that I don't want to go in there? You know what I mean? Like,
I'm asking.
right? It's human.
What's the difference?
I don't know. It's the same concept. Like, somebody asked me why I was so concerned about a raccoon crossing, you know, a street that could get hit by a car. And it's like, you know, there's a certain responsibility that we have as human beings.
The basement's not living. A person's a living being.
It isn't that our formula is okay and somebody else's formula needs to change.
I don't think it needs to change. I think maybe they need to reconnect with what is intrinsically valued. I think we disconnect at times, right? And it's okay.
So I can only speak for myself, right? And I was raised by people who genuinely just, all they wanted was to be able to provide a life that would be solid and stable. And, you know, the only thing that they ever taught us was no matter what happens, we're all humans. And at the end of the day, unless we're taking care of each other.
Yeah.
Like, my parents come from an environment where one group of people decided that another group of people weren't good enough.
Yeah.
And then decided to hunt them, persecute them, whatever it is, right? So I believe that when you come from an environment like that.
And those guys had big beards. They did.
I think so.
Yeah. Actually, that's part of the story, isn't it? Yeah. So now when you see it and you hear it now, right?
But as people, like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, I can discriminate. I can discriminate against a building. I can look at a building and say it's gross and it's dirty and it's ugly and it's nasty, and it's not going to turn around and take what I said and tell their child that a girl who looked like this said this about me, therefore these people are no good. And that child is not going to turn around and say that. Where then, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 generations down the line, somebody's going to be like, hey, brown kid, hey, do you know somebody who wants to sweep up my apartment? Versus when you have somebody who has decided that because you're of a different color, you're coming here and you're taking something from me versus contributing something to me. When that mentality goes through, we continue to divide and we continue to create an environment where there's this massive split. And the environment that you end up living in, like, how did we end up with ghettos? Like, how did we end up with a group of people who live on one side of Kingston Road who don't have and who are, I don't know, addicted to drugs and all of these other things, right?
Then we're talking about some systematic things.
Yeah.
But we do it individually is my point.
Yeah.
You're from that side of the road. I'm from this side of the road. You go to that. So that's my point. Yeah. So you've been on both sides of it. I think that's what makes you really special. Is that, but I think all of us tend to be sometimes, we've seen it from both angles. Most people have, but most people see themselves on one side. Like right now, I'm being discriminated against. Well, you don't realize sometimes you're discriminating too. So as somebody who's kind of seen it from both sides, and I've never actually heard you ever sound like you discriminate. So basement's okay, but, and I'm just challenging you on it. That's all I was doing. But really, what I think that you have you're in a really special position to be able to say to someone who feels like they're being discriminated against because you felt it. And it sucks.
It hurts.
It hurts. And it almost feels like now, therefore, it almost changes your behavior because now I'm going to act this way now.
100%.
It almost prompts you to act a certain way.
And then you invite it.
And then it just continues to feed.
Or you invite something different.
Right. Yep. But then you didn't do that.
I did.
Oh, you did?
Oh, no, of course I did.
What changed though? What did
the realization? Okay,
how did you break that cycle?
Okay, so discrimination-wise, I don't think that I would. So yes, I judged the kids that I went to school with, and you know what? We're human. There's always going to be some aspect of judgment because we don't understand. 100%. But I was never somebody who was like, oh, you know what? Like, you smell funny, and I don't want to talk to you, type thing. That was never me. And I think it was because I was always the kid who didn't fit in. So I didn't ever want to make somebody else feel the way that I felt. But when we started our businesses, my mentality was very much what I was being told by whom I viewed as people who were successful, which was it's your bottom line. You've got to think about how much money you're making, this and this and that. You don't bring emotion into it.
I mean, on the other side, when you were being discriminated against.
What about it?
Yeah. How did you stop yourself from buying into that?
I'm going to get to that.
Yeah.
So bottom line things that started to bring. So when it comes into the business of real estate, property management, rentals, the best way to increase your bottom line is to become somebody who discriminates. I don't want people who are on welfare. I don't want people who don't have proper jobs, who don't look like this, who don't come from the perfect modeled family, and you start to discriminate. And you start to be very selective of what you think the right people are to put into place.
You have something to protect, right? Your investment.
Yeah, well, you're not. That's what we learned is the minute I took the humanity out of what we were doing, the minute I took out these are humans and their livelihoods, and I started treating people the way people treated my parents, we had a very hard time with our businesses. We nearly went bankrupt. And why? Because when you treat people like garbage, you get garbage back.
Yeah.
And when you have problematic tenants who are leaving, who are damaging things, who are like creating problems because you're not treating them with what human beings want to be treated with respect, and they want to be treated as if they count for something.
No matter how they look.
Yeah. You know what I mean? For me as a kid, all I wanted was to not feel like I was somehow less than. And my parents made sure that that never happened, which is why when kids did it, it didn't matter because the people who matter didn't do it to me. So the rest of it didn't really matter. So now I'm turning around and I'm doing something like that to somebody. And in turn, they're going to react the way any human being would when they're being made to feel somehow less than.
Yeah.
There you go. You nailed it right now. You just said, and that's the key. It seems that you didn't respond to the discrimination because you were being treated right by someone or somewhere that mattered most. Now, what do you say to people who don't have that? How could they overcome it?
It's hard because I think about that a lot too, right? Like, how do you deal with that? And the only way, so you know what? We're not all blessed with wonderful parents.
Right? You're very blessed.
I am so incredibly
So what
blessed.
happens with someone who didn't have that same
I think
same
that
leverage?
So I think the most important thing
Where do you
for
find your
them,
leverage?
you find them. Like you have, where is one of those?
What would you say to them?
You let her talk.
Hurry up. I want to know.
Hurry up.
I'm so curious. There's an answer inside your head.
I'm
calling
like,
this
keep
answer
talking.
from your head.
To be honest, the only, I know. So the only way I think so I know a lot of people who don't have that. You know what I mean? And I didn't know it wasn't a normal thing until. And I think one of the biggest things that those people need to understand, number one, is, okay, so life sucked, sure. People weren't always there for you, okay? But now you have a choice. You have a choice. You could decide that you're worth it.
Yeah.
You can decide that you're worth it. You can decide that you are not just some unworthy, less than kind of insignificant speckle on the earth. Okay? And you can decide that what you're going to do is you are going to make a change in what happened to you. And the minute that I believe you find one person whom you can bring out of that space that you were put into, you will find that you will create this community of people who are now willing to show you who you are.
Wow, that's great.
Because you decided for a minute that somebody else mattered more than you.
That's great. I totally, I see just the way you described it. So taking it from like empowering somebody to realize that you just took it from being the victim of something to forget about yourself for a second and empowering somebody else. And through empowering somebody else, you get empowered.
How can a speckle of nothingness create change in somebody else? It can't. You have to be somebody worthy.
And we're not the stories we tell ourselves either, right?
Or that somebody else told
Or
us.
someone else told us. Exactly.
It's you when you start telling yourself your story and help somebody with their story.
100%. You just
Obviously, you have something.
a speckle of nothingness can't change anything. You can't.
Everyone can do good. Yeah,
So if you can make one person feel better about themselves, clearly you are not nothing.
I need a tissue. Honestly, that's so powerful. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Any last thought of your experience today and how what you were thinking coming in? And
Oh, so not what I was thinking at all. Oh my goodness. Oh, when you guys sent me like the little brief questions of like, what was the point that like changed things? I was like, oh, we're going to tell the story about almost going bankrupt and how that. So very, very different. Very different than the experience I was having. And so much more powerful, I think, to be able to talk about this, because I think we spend a lot of time talking about all the things that sound really
Really good. And,
like, oh, you know, I came from this like place of nothingness and I built this and I overcame this and these are all the great things and whatever.
That's not the whole story. That is part of the story. Both of them are true. Both of them are true.
When you like just thinking about the discussion that we just had, what we discussed is really the reason why.
Yeah. It is the essence of it.
Why we were able to do what we were able to do. Not because I'm smart, not because I made some good choices, and not because I decided one day to pivot my business. It's because I had two human beings who sacrificed themselves for me. For me. No matter what it is that they wanted. They made sure that it was me first and then instilled that in me. And because of that and because of their principles, we somehow, you know, defied the odds. I had an actual psychologist once tell me that. You know, you defied the odds. Kids who come from places like you don't actually end up like you. And I thought, okay.
how about we change those odds?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Let's change that. Let's change that.
Thanks. I don't think I want to talk to you anymore.
Yeah.
Whatever. I mean, I'm sure it was meant as a compliment, but okay.
They're a little disconnected. Is that?
That's our theme of the day.
Right? Maybe. Yeah. So this was great. I mean, to be able to talk about it. We don't generally ever have time to talk about it. I don't think anyone's ever asked.
Fast for that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's a phone call.
Of course.
And an email or notification that goes on.
Of course. And it's like everybody wants to know what's the secret to the success, the secret to the success. And it's like, oh, let me think of something really creative and crafty to say.
Be a human being. Yeah.
Just, be a human. Be a good human.
Yeah.
That is the secret to success. Be a good human and realize that the majority of humans are good people who just need to be reminded of it.
Yeah.
They just need to be reminded that they are worthy of something if they want it. And it's okay to want it. And it's okay to
Everyone's deserving of it, for sure.
That's it.
Thanks for coming, man.
Thank you.
This was great. It was great to get to know you this way.
Thank you.
You know, we've run into each other at boards of trade meetings, and you know that's an atmosphere where we're like in like the spirit is commercial spirit, right? And then here it's a human spirit. If I have a choice, right?
Always.
Right. So thanks for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
I really appreciate.
Thank you for the opportunity.
taking the time.